Hello, ngHouston. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Bonnie, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to talk about Nest.js, which I'm very excited about because I haven't had a chance to look at it, but all the cool kids are excited about this, so I wanted to find out about this. Before we get started, I want to introduce the panel. Andrew Weens is joining us for the first time today. Andrew, you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. So we said, my name's Andrew. I'm at Oasis Digital. Looking forward to learning more about Nest.
That's awesome. And we are big fans of Oasis Digital here at ngHouston. So tell everybody that we said hello. And then we have, well, I'm gonna go to Lance next, because speaking of Oasis Digital, because Lance gets a referral bonus for bringing us a new panelist. How are you doing, Lance? We haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. Yeah, I've wanted to be here, but with the change of the schedule to Wednesdays during the day, I had a client meeting, but they shifted the client meeting so I can show up today. I don't know if I'll be around next week or beyond that, but I should be able to show up more often now. Looking forward to hearing about Nest.
We missed you, and I'm glad to have you back. And we're matchy today. We're both in red shirts.
Yeah, mine's for Montana. Yours is Colorado. So
yeah, I grew up in Colorado because we have a Colorado guest today. But before we get to our guests, we have a couple more panelists. Javi, you want to say hi?
Hi, my name is Javi. I'm a full stack developer in Securus Technologies in the Monitoring Solutions Center, and I'm looking forward to learn something new today.
And Javi is actually in Houston now, so he's like the ngHouston panelist. So we're neighbors. Thanks for joining us, Javi. And one more, we have Preston Lamb. How are you doing, Preston?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Yeah, my name is Preston Lamb. I've been a presenter on ngHouston before, but I think this is the first time I've been a panelist. So I'm excited.
It's an easier job.
Yeah, I'm a developer at Motive Health in Salt Lake City, mostly Angular and Node. So I'm excited to learn a little bit about Nest today, and hopefully we'll be able to use it in some projects coming up.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to have you. And speaking of Nest, this brings us to Ely Lucas. So I think Ely, you wrote an article or something. I heard you knew about Nest.js, and so I reached out and asked you to come on and teach us. And a couple of us have not had time. Like, I know it's cool because everybody's talking about it, but I actually have not looked at it yet. So some of us, this will be our very first introduction to Nest, and I'm really excited.
Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, I've been a big fan of Nest for a couple of years now. But a little bit about me first. My name is Ely Lucas. I am a software engineer and developer advocate at Ionic. And yeah, so just kind of love like all things web, including like JavaScript technologies and stuff that you can use on the server side. So Node and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you coming and teaching us. I'm very excited to have you. And plus, you're cool people, so I like you anyway. Not only do I have you on the show, but I have you with a really cool topic. So this is great, and I'm very excited to see this presentation. And I know you have a lot to cover, so I'm just gonna like shut up and let you fly and show us, teach us some cool stuff.
Sounds good. Let me share my screen here real quick.
And anybody watching, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. We're going to try to get to them, but Ely has a lot to cover today. So we're just going to try and let him run with it. And then if we need to come back for follow-up questions, we will. But we're just going to dive right in.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good. So can you see my slides?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so I just got a few slides here. I kind of want to cruise through the slides here real quick and get to the meaty chunk demo portion of it. So first off, welcome everybody to ngHouston. I'm excited to be here for the first time. I already kind of introduced myself, but again, my name is Ely Lucas. I work for a company called Ionic. If you haven't heard of us, we make a mobile development toolkit using web technologies that you already know and love to build iOS apps, Android apps, progressive web apps, Electron apps, so kind of like the whole gamut there. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, let me know. You can catch me on Twitter at Ely Lucas, and that is ELY, not ELI. It's a little bit different. But yeah, let me know. But today we're actually not talking about Ionic. We're talking about another awesome technology called Nest.js. And this is one of the things I'm really excited about because it kind of like lets me use my like front end development skills to build backends. And the reason behind this is just because like we have this whole like idea of like the full stack developer, right? It's kind of becoming more rare to be a full stack developer these days. And that's just because like it's becoming harder and harder as the technologies get more and more advanced. So back when I first started development, like it was pretty much all back-end development, and then you had something like generate your front end for you, kind of like ASP.NET or Cold Fusion or something like that. Like you really didn't have to concern yourself too much with the front end code. Your back end would do that for you. But as times progressed, like becoming a front end developer actually started to become like a real full-time position. And especially over the past few years with the advent of like Angular and React and Vue and all these like front end frameworks, like just specializing in one of those could be like a full-time job by itself. But still, there's this idea that like if you can become like a full stack developer, or if you have a team of full stack developers, like you can really increase your productivity, because then the front end person doesn't have to wait for the back end person to do like a update to an API or something like that. Like you can go to like any portion of the stack and do it. And so that's kind of what we're talking here today and what it's going to be about. So I'd like to introduce you to a framework called Nest.js. And the very first thing to know about Nest is that it just has like a really wicked awesome cat logo, right? So the creator of Nest, Camille, like he loves cats, and so if you ever go to the Nest website or anything like that, you're going to see cats all over the place. And I just think like this logo is pretty badass. It reminds me of the Thundercats. But besides that, like Nest is a progressive node framework for building efficient, reliable, and scalable server-side applications. And so Nest is another node framework that you can use to build web APIs and websites, but it's also a little bit more about that. You can use it to build APIs. You can use it to build microservices, real-time communication between backend services, all that kind of fun stuff. But really, like the thing about it is that it's one of the first highly opinionated frameworks that run on top of Node. And what we mean by that is that like one of Nest's main goals is to create lots of consistency between different types of applications. So one thing that can happen with Node apps, and like if you're using like the most popular web framework, Express, to build Node apps, is that they're all kind of architected a little bit differently. So hopping in one and hopping in another, like there's a little bit of learning curve and whatnot. Nest provides a bunch of building blocks and then kind of lets you know, like, okay, if you have a particular piece of logic that's going to go somewhere, like this is where you're going to put it. And if you're an Angular developer, that's going to sound kind of familiar, because Angular has actually the same philosophy. In Angular, you have your services and you have providers and guards and whatnot. So like if you're going to go write a particular piece of logic, like you're going to know where to go to put that. Another goal of Nest is like to make the learning curve for a front-end developer that wants to do development on the back end really small. And the way that they've accomplished that is that Nest is like actually really inspired by Angular. So the architectures are very similar. As we go through this, we're going to see names of stuff that are similar to what they are in the Angular world. Stuff like modules and services and controllers and stuff like that. And so like if you're an Angular developer, going to do Nest development on the server side is going to feel very familiar to you. But besides that, Nest also shares a lot of similarities with other enterprise grade backend frameworks, something like an ASP.NET or a Java Spring or a Ruby on Rails. If you're familiar with working in any of those, you're going to find concepts that are also familiar inside of Nest that really like a lot of the other frameworks on Node just don't have, or you have to do yourself. And what I really think is really unique about Nest is that how it uses TypeScript. So Nest heavily utilizes TypeScript and decorators to be able to do a lot of the stuff that it does, and it's really what provides a lot of the magic. And so let's talk about some of the Nest building blocks that we have. And so we have modules, controllers, services, pipes, guards, interceptors. These should all feel like, as an Angular developer, these should all feel pretty familiar to you. And what these are, they're like a good set of abstractions with the goal that you can write good, clean, consistent, and reusable components. And so that not only like could you take like code from one application to another application, but if you hop from one Nest application into a completely different Nest application, they should all feel fairly similar, and you should be able to get up and running fairly quickly. And then, not to be outdone, like the Nest documentation is pretty awesome. But what I thought was really cool, and this is one of the very first things that I noticed about Nest as I was diving into it. If you take a look here, we got like the hamburger icon in the top menu, right? And so their menu actually has like a real hamburger icon. And once I saw this, like being the mobile developer that I am and whatnot, I just thought this was awesome. This was the framework for me.
That's funny. I've never seen someone do that.
Yeah. All right, so to get started with Nest, so it is a a node-based framework, and so we're going to use all the node tooling that we're already familiar with as front-end developers. And so you npm install globally the Nest.js CLI, or if you use npx, you can use that too. And then Nest has a pretty good CLI as well. Actually, I think it is a fork of the Angular CLI, or uses good chunks of the Angular CLI. So it's very similar. It has generators, and you can create projects with it and run the tests with it and all that fun stuff. But you just do a Nest new project name. And so let's go ahead and dive into what we got here. So I'll close the slides and pull up my prompt here. And so I have an application. And so there's this little conference coming up, right? And the application that we're going to build here today is going to be kind of the back end for this conference. So we've got Angular Denver. Anybody hear of it?
I'll see you there.
Awesome.
Whoop, whoop. I was coming off mute. I was like, oh, Angular Denver, I'm so excited. Don't get me started, man. It's going to be great.
Right. All right. So we're going to build a back end for a conference app for Angular Denver. And so to do that, well, I've already created a Nest project. So this is pretty much just a blank Nest project, Nest new Angular-Denver, just so you didn't have to sit here and watch me install a whole bunch of NPM and dependencies and stuff like that. So I'll fire up code and give you a quick tour of the application here real quick. And so this is kind of what you get out of the box with a Nest app. And so some of it is probably going to look familiar to you. So this is the main entry point of the app. And so what we're doing here is we're creating a Nest object, and then we're listening on port 3000. And then we're passing it in the app module. And so modules in Nest are very similar to modules in Angular. And so if we go take a look at the module here, we got, the imports that we're familiar with. Something that's here in Nest that's not in Angular is the controllers. And so Nest is a MVC, or a model view controller type framework. And so you got the controllers that are responsible for handling the requests that come in to your backend. And so that's where all those are going to live. And then you have your providers, or your services. So we hook up our providers here inside of Nest, just like we do inside of Angular. So they're available for the dependency injection framework that's built in. And we'll go look at the controller here. And so this is just the default controller. And so the first thing to notice up here is the controller decorator. And this lets Nest know that this is going to be responsible for listening for requests coming in. Now, we're not passing in any parameters to this controller decorator. So that's saying that this is going to listen to the root URL. If we passed in something like speakers in here, then it will listen to your API/speakers. And then going down a little bit, we're injecting an app service into here. And this get hello method, we have this get decorator. And so what this is telling us is this saying, hey, when a get request comes into this particular API, call this method is going to be what is responsible for it. So call this get hello method. And this get hello method simply returns a string hello world. Okay. And I'll fire up the Nest server. And so I'll do a npm run start debug, I believe is not npm run. And this will fire up the Nest server. And what I'm going to use Postman. Everybody familiar with Postman and what it does?
Used it somewhat, although I've always felt like I've only used a portion of its capabilities.
Okay. I'm going to pull this over here to another window so I can at least see people. Okay, so Nest is up and running. So if I go into Postman, so Postman just lets me generate HTTP requests to to a server. And so I'm at localhost 3000, and I'll hit send here. Yeah, and there we go. We got hello world coming back. And what we can do inside of code, one thing that's pretty awesome between Node and TypeScript and all that fun stuff is I have really easy Node debugging. So I started up the Nest server in debug mode. And so what that does is it launches the inspect protocol inside of Node, and Visual Studio will attach to it here. And actually, let me just set a breakpoint here. We'll show like debugging real quick. I'm gonna hit F5 to attach to the debugger. And if I go back into Postman, you can see that, I got my breakpoint debugging, pretty much everything that I would expect from a good debugging experience. I got my console window, I got breakpoints, I got my call stack, any local variables to watch, all that kind of fun stuff. So that's pretty cool. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a new controller that's going to return back a list of speakers for us. And so over here, I'm going to leave the Nest server up here and running on the left, and here on the right, I'm going to use the CLI. And so I'm going to say Nest G for generate a controller and speakers. And this will create a speaker controller for us along with a spec file. And we'll go take a look at that. And so you can see up here, pretty simple, but I do have that speakers up here in the URL. So that is telling Nest that to list, this is the controller that's going to be responsible for /speakers. And also I'm going to go ahead and create a service. And so we'll do Nest G service speakers. And something that the Nest CLI does for you at the same time is it's going to automatically wire up any providers that you add to the project into the module that you're currently working in. And so we got our speaker service here and imported. And we'll go ahead and start here in the speaker service. And so you can see here, this is just pretty much a simple class. And we're going to start off with just a list of speakers. We'll do some hard-coded data. And I got some code over here that I will go ahead and paste in here. And we'll take a look at some of the speakers that we got. So we have a speakers array that's going to follow a speaker class. We'll add that here in just a moment. But then we got some speakers. So I think we might recognize some of these people. Got me and Mike Hardington, who's a friend of ours. And then we got Bonnie. The theme of Angular Denver this year is rock stars, and so we got our rock stars name. So I'm calling myself the Rock, and that's not because I'm like the Rock the actor. It's just because I had the personality of a rock. So that's what we got going on there.
The beard, I love the beardo. The monsters, I do that on Twitter, and I love it. But the beardo,
yes,
the weirdo beardo,
the weirdo beardo.
One
I
of
only
these
say
days,
that because I love mine.
One of these days, Hardington's going to show up at a convention with his beard shaved off, and no one will recognize him.
He better not. I will kick it. No, I can't say that on the air. No, he can't. He's not allowed to. We went through this with Jeff Cross. We didn't even get a poll. It was just all of a sudden he shaved his beard and didn't even tell us, and that's not okay. No, this is a good. Once it has its own Twitter, you can't shave it without at least giving us a heads up.
Yeah, it's almost a sentient being at that point, and shaving it off would be murder.
Yeah. Yeah, bite your tongue, Lance.
All right, so we're going to create that speaker class here real quick, and so we're going to use just a regular JavaScript class. So we'll have a ID of a number, a name of a string, a nickname of a string, and then the rockstar rating. That will be a number. And back here in the speaker service, we'll give that an import. There we go. Now we'll create a method called get. We'll call it get speakers. And for now, we'll just simply return this array. So we'll say return this.speakers. And inside of the controller, speakers controller, first thing that we're going to want to do is inject. So we have access to that speaker service. So we'll say private speaker service, And now we'll have add the get attribute. So this will respond to get requests to this URL. And we'll just call this method get. And we'll say return this dot speaker service dot get speakers. All right, and if everything is good to go there, we'll watch this compile real quick and go back to Postman and hit send. Oh, let's go to the speakers URL. There we go. Now we're getting back our list of speakers for the API endpoint. Now, some things to kind of point out what's happening here that's kind of cool. So we've already talked about like how this controller method is binding itself to the speakers URL. We've already talked about how this get is telling that this method is responsible for a get request to this particular URL. But something that's happening here is that this get speakers is returning back, a JavaScript object. And what's happening for us is that it's automatically turning that JavaScript object into JSON for us as it goes out. And so that's kind of nice. Nest is set up by default to return back JSON. If we're building a RESTful API, it doesn't have to be JSON. It could be XML or binary, or it doesn't care about the format. But most of the time we're talking JSON back and forth to our APIs, and by default, Nest is set up to use it. So I'm going to take a quick side here real quick and talk about some other libraries that I like to call like friends of Nest, because they're libraries that go along really well with Nest. And if I open up the package, I already have them installed in this project, and we'll just talk about them real quick. We got two. We got one called Class Transformer, which can be used to like transform objects from classes to plain objects and plain objects back into classes and whatnot, which is helpful when we're dealing with JavaScript objects. And then we have Class Validator, which we'll use a little bit later to do validation. But I'm also using a library called TypeORM. And TypeORM is a TypeScript-based object relational mapper that we can use to talk to a database. And so what we're going to do, because since we don't normally hard code our data in our backends like this, usually we're talking to some type of database, we're going to connect to a Postgres database and actually make database calls to it. So let me fire that up here real quick. Oh, where did it go? There it is. There's this monitor. And so I got Postgres here, and I've already created the database, but it's just a blank database. And so if I go down here into Confap, which is the database that we're going to be using, and take a look at we'll go down to schemas, public, and down into tables. Oh, it's not Confap. I want Angular Denver, sorry. Schemas, public, tables. All right. So right now we just have a blank database with no tables built into it. And we're going to use TypeORM. So TypeORM has a lot of the same advantages that Nest does. It's TypeScript based. It uses decorators to do a lot of the stuff. And it's kind of a code first ORM. And so I come from a Microsoft background where I use stuff like ASP.NET and Entity Framework. And for me, with that enterprise type background, I find like working with Nest and TypeORM very similar to working with like ASP.NET and Entity Framework, because I think TypeORM is heavily influenced by Entity Framework. And so the first thing that we want to do is get TypeORM, its configuration, its connection string to talk to the database. And so if we come back over here into the app module inside of the imports here, I'll kind of paste this in here real quick, and it's not going to give me the import. Pull that in. Here we go. Pull in the speaker. And so this is pretty simple. We're saying the type is a Postgres database on my local box. Got the username, password. Don't pay attention to the password or else you'll learn how I do all my passwords. And then the database that we're talking to. And then kind of this glob that we have here that points to the entities. And so I'm actually going to change this to be speaker.entity.ts. And so I can find it, and there we go, it updated itself. All right, and so if that is all good, it's just a spacing issue. Come over here, let the app recompile.
While we're compiling, I just want everyone to notice that I have a higher Rockstar rating than Mike Hardington.
Yeah.
You're so great, Eli.
Oh, okay. And so what we need to do here now is set up our speaker class with the type ORM decorators so it knows how to build the database. And so we'll add these as we go along. So first we're going to mark this as an entity, and then we're going to give it a name of speakers, because by default, type ORM likes to make the table names singular, and I like plural. And then down here on the ID, we're going to call this the primary generated column. And so this is going to be a primary ID column. And then here we'll give this a column. So everything that we mark with these decorators are going to become columns in the table in our database. And then we could also pass it in some more metadata. So I can say that this name field is going to be 100 character length. And we'll do the same thing with nickname. And then on the Rockstar rating, we'll just use column. And then something else to note is that type ORM is going to use the types that we have here in TypeScript. So we've got numbers, strings. It's going to use those to automatically set the data types inside of the database itself. And I'm missing a paren right there. And so there we go. Oh, I did forget one column here. Let me pull this in. Hopefully it's not too late. What do we got here? Let me kill the table real quick. So we can see here that it generated the table. I'm going to kill it real quick and see if regenerating it gets rid of that error. And if it doesn't, we'll move on. It doesn't. Read data is declared here.
We believe in you, Eli.
Nothing like some pair programming sessions on ngHouston here. Oh, it's complaining about my array that I already have defined here. So I'll go ahead and get rid of this because we're not going to be using that anymore.
But for a brief shining moment, I was cooler than Hardington. I'm going to take that with me.
All right, there we go. All right, now, so if we go back over here into Postgres, refresh this table, we can see that we have a speakers table, and we also have all of our columns. And if we get the properties for this and go take a look at the data types on the columns, you can see we got our integers, character varying strings of 100 length, all that stuff that pulled from the entity model used to create that table. So like I said, type ORM is a code first. And so like you do all of your database schema generation and stuff based on code, not based on writing a whole bunch of SQL scripts and whatnot. Type ORM is pretty good at generating upgrade files for you. So like if you're going like from, if like you add something to your model or whatnot, it can generate the files to handle that. So now what we can do, I'm going to go into the database and insert some data. So we'll hit the query tool here, and we'll get our speakers back. And so I think this is all the same values that it was before. So now you're back to being cooler than Mike.
I'm not actually cooler than Mike. That's the joke, y'all, just so you know. He's very cool.
Yeah. All right. And inside of the speaker service, now what I need to do is I need to get access to the database. And TypeORM uses a repository pattern for accessing data in the database. And it makes it really easy. You don't have to generate your own repositories. You can use some base class and things to generics inside of TypeScript. I'll just add this constructor here real quick and import this. So this is going to give me access to a speakers repository that's going to talk the type of speaker. And now I can say return this.speakers repository.find, and this will automatically just return back all rows in that particular table. All right.
This really brings me a lot of joy, Eli. I'm just telling you, this code that you're writing is very beautiful. So simple. I love it.
Okay, and back here, like if we do it, this should look pretty much exactly the same, which it does except for the created date. And so the created date was added there because I wanted to have like a field in our entity that is kind of like metadata that's used for maybe like backend purposes, but we don't necessarily want to return it to the client, right? Like the client may or may not care about the created date, but in our particular case, we're going to say that they don't care. So we want to get rid of it. Now, what we could do is we could, come over here into our controller, and we can get access. Like we could say const speakers. This is returning back a promise now, and so kind of another cool thing that Nest is doing is Nest is unwrapping the promise for us. We didn't have to like handle that ourselves, but we'll go ahead and await on this promise and turn this into a async await method. And so now speakers is just a speakers array. And so we could do something like, return speakers.map, and, do this whole mapping and include like every field, but every field that we want and none of the ones that we don't. So we can say like name, s.name. Let's just do that real quick. And why are you?
You're going to have to put parentheses around your curly braces within your arrow function. Either that or because it's getting confused with the open curly brace there at the end of line 12.
Yeah, I'm not returning. Thank you.
Yeah, the shorter form of it is just putting parens around the curly, but this also works.
Right. Okay, so if we want to see this work real quick. There we go. Now we're just returning back names, right? And so I could do this, but this has some code in our controllers. And really, when you're working on an MVC type architecture, you want your controllers to be like super simple. Like really, their main job is to listen to requests coming in and talk to services, and services are going to do the back end work. We don't really want to put this code like in our service either, because it doesn't really feel like you may not want to return this object with this information missing from the service all the time and whatnot. But what we can do is we can use that class transformer library that I talked about a little bit earlier to do some of this craft work for us. And so if I go back over to the entity, I can use, so class transformer is also decorator based. And so I can come here to the created date and I can set a field and that, and use this exclude, not exclude, exclude. And we'll import that. From class transformer. And so now I have this decorator. Now in order for class transformer to actually do the work for it, we have to run it through a particular method. So if we go into the controller, I'll go ahead and get rid of this cruft. And we'll say return, and we'll call a class, or class to plain. So we're taking a class object, we're turning it into a plain JavaScript object. And I'll run that speakers array through it. And we'll make sure that compiles real quick. Yep. And back in Postman, you can see now where we don't have the created date anymore. And so, oh, hey, we had Wes join us. What's up, Wes?
Hey, how's it going, Eli?
Good. So you can see
You're late,
that.
Wes, you slacker.
Yeah. Sorry. I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead, Eli.
Yeah, no problem. Like, if you have any questions, just shoot them on out. And so you can see our created date is now gone. And so that's awesome. Like, we don't have to write any of that type of left to right mapping code inside of our controllers anymore. But something about this is still bothering me. And that is, like, anytime like I want to do this, I'm going to have to write like this extra cruft code inside of my controllers. And it's going against my philosophy that, hey, I need to keep my controllers like as tight and clean as possible code-wise. And so what we can do is Nest provides one of the building blocks for us to run this type of logic. And let me hop over to a slide here real quick. And this is called an interceptor. And so an interceptor is a specialized piece of Nest middleware that listens to a HTTP request before it gets to your controller, and then also gives you access to it after your controller is done with it. And the cool thing about this is that once your controller returns the object, your interceptor can take that object and it can manipulate it. It can change its shape. It can, take out certain values like what we want to do in this case. But let's take a look at see what that's going to look like here with our app. And so if I come over here, I'll use the generator to create a new interceptor. And we'll just call it data because I'm not very good at naming things.
So Eli, would you say this is similar to the Angular HTTP interceptor concept?
It's pretty similar in the instance that it like the Angular HTTP interceptor can listen to requests, HTTP requests. So it's similar to it in that type of regards. I think maybe the use cases that you use interceptors inside of Nest are a little bit different because I guess you could manipulate the data inside of Angular like that. I've never really felt the need to do that myself. Where like on the back end, like this is a very common use case.
Sure. Okay, cool.
Yep. And so what we got here is we got this intercept method, and this intercept method has this handler, and this is an RxJS observable. And what we can use with is we can pipe this, and once this observable, like so, when this once you subscribe to it and data starts flowing through it, that's when the controller's done with it and it's starting to go on its way back out. And so I can use the map operator. I'll take the data. And so this data is going to, in our particular case, going to be that speakers array. And let's import this. No. Observable. No, that's not right. Operators. All right, and so now instead of running that class to plane method inside of our controller, we can call that class to plane object inside of here. And so we'll say return class to plane data. And it looks like that is happy. If we go back over to our controller, we can now take this code out and just return back the speakers. And now that we have the interceptor created, we need to tell Nest that we want to use the interceptor. And there's a couple of different ways that we can do that. We can do it on a per method level. And so there is a use interceptors. No, it's not user interceptors method, and I can pass it in here, and so I can say fire up a new data interceptor, and this will tell like whenever a request comes into this particular method to use this interceptor on it, and we'll see what that looks like here real quick. And so if I go back over here to Postman, hit send, we should see, yep, the created date is still not there. So we can use it at a method level. I could also take this decorator and move it up here and use it at the class level or for this particular route. Or if I wanted to, I could use it app-wide, and that's what I'm going to do. And so to use it app-wide, we set it up in the app modules providers section. And so we set this up like we're setting up a dependency injection. So we'll have a particular token. And so we'll say app interceptor. And then we'll say use the class data interceptor, user class. There we go. And so this is what this is saying is like, hey, anytime that the dependency injection framework asks for an interceptor, go ahead and use this interceptor in its place. And it does that for you all behind the scenes. And this compiles. There we go. Go back over to Postman, and we can see we're still doing good. And so we're using the interceptor to like, remove particular items from our entity that we don't want to expose to the front end. But you can also use interceptors for a lot more things. They're really good at kind of like a lot of cross-cutting concerns, like logging or setting up like request IDs. Like one thing that we can do that's pretty quick is we can manipulate, like a lot of times when you return data from your API, you just don't want it to be the straight data. You kind of want to have some metadata that goes along with it, like maybe like a request ID or the timing that the API took to return it. And then like you have a data property that actually contains the data. Maybe you want the status code or any extra messages. Interceptors are a really good place to do that. And so one thing that we can do is up here is we can add really simple timings to our API to see how long they're taking. So if we do like a const start time equals date.now, and then once it is finished with the request, we can say const end time equals date.now. And now we can return back a new object. And so we'll have a data property on this object that will be our actual data. But then we'll also have like a timing property. And so we'll say end time minus start time. And this will give us the number of milliseconds.
You need an E on the end of end time.
Yeah. There we go. Make sure that compiles. Okay, now, so you can see the shape of the data changed a little bit, but now I have the timing. It took 11 milliseconds, and that's mostly probably spent in recompiling. But now when I do this, you can see it's much quicker.
That is very cool.
All right, let's move on. So we saw how to do a GET request that returns back a list of entities. Let's see what it's like to do a GET request where we pass in a URL parameter to pull back a single entity. And so if we come back over here into the speakers controller, we'll make a new method. So we're still going to use the GET because it's still responding to GET requests, but now we're going to pass in a parameter to it, and we're just going to call it ID. And so this is very similar to setting up routing inside of an Angular application. And we'll call the method get by ID. And we're going to pass in the ID, which is a number. And we'll just return this .speaker service we'll call get by ID as well and pass in the ID. This method doesn't exist yet, so I'll use TypeScript to generate it for me. Now, unfortunately, it always throws it up at the top of the class, which is not where I want it. So I'll put it down here. And here I'll say return this dot speaker repository. I can talk, find one, and pass it in that ID. All right.
I think you wanted to do ID instead of the number 1.
Oh, yeah. We'll just always get back me. All right. And then the last thing that we need to do is we need to tell Nest where the value from this ID is coming from, because it could be coming from multiple places. It could be coming from the URL. It could be coming in from the request body. It could be coming in through HTTP headers. And so we need to be a little bit more specific where it's coming from. So we'll use a decorator here that will do that. It's called a param, and then we'll just say from the parameters, pull it in from ID. All right. Okay, and so our list is still working, but now if I come up here to the URL and say /1, and we'll hit it. Here we go. We got one coming back. And honestly, I was expecting that not to work. And
because you didn't await it.
No, because Nest is good at handling the promises by itself.
Oh, okay.
But why is that working? Let's see. Well, let me set a breakpoint here and do it. This is supposed to be one of those things where like it fails, and I'm like, yes, it failed, but let me show you why it failed. And now I'm like, why is it working?
The joy of live coding demonstrations.
Yes. All right. So, So ID is a number. So what was supposed to happen? So everything that comes in through the parameter as a string, right? And so we can see here that it's coming in through a string, but for some reason, it's working, even though my ID is a number, but I'm passing it as a string. And so like this is supposed to, I wonder if maybe like there was an update to type ORM that made it like, okay, we're not going to care about the type of the objects anymore, or something like that since the last time I tried this. But this was supposed to fail.
I just want you to know how much we all relate with you right now, Eli, because we get you. We totally get you. It's even more fun when it's working and you don't know why, or when it's not working and you don't know why, but this is fine.
I mean, if we look at ID here.
I mean, JavaScript's probably just going to coerce it back into a number, right? So.
Yeah, that's probably what's happening. But let's pretend it's not working, so I can show you another awesome feature of Nest. So if this like was just returning back null, let's pretend that happened. And so what we can do is, so we're using TypeScript here, and we said this is a number, but really what we're doing is we're kind of lying to our program right here, because TypeScript really doesn't check stuff at runtime. It's just kind of like for the most part, a dev time tool. So what we could have done is we could have said like, turn this into a number. So we could have said like new ID equals parse int, the ID, something like this, and then pass this in. And then we stop lying to our program here and we say that's a string kind of deal. So that's one thing that we can do, but we can also take advantage of that class transformer library that we were using earlier. And since we're using TypeScript, and since we have metadata about our actual types that's available to us at runtime, we can use that class transformer to morph that object into an actual something that we're expecting it to be. And so let me reverse this here real quick. Okay, and so to do that, I could say const, new ID equals. Oh, actually, no. I'm just going to show you how we'll do it instead of Nest. And so Nest has another piece, one of its building blocks called pipes. And let's take a look at the slide for that here real quick. And so pipes are another piece of middleware. And so unlike interceptors, pipes sit at the beginning of the request before they come into your controller. And instead of pipes are often used for stuff like data manipulation before it gets into your controller, which is what we're going to use it for. But you can also do stuff like validation is another popular thing. So you take a look at the object as it's coming in, validate it, and if it's not valid, kick it back out before it even ever gets to your controller. So you don't have to worry about muxing up your controller with validation type logic. So let's take a look to see what a pipe looks like. We'll create one. So nest g pipe, and we'll call this a data pipe.
Yeah, I was surprised to see pipe on the list of analogs to Angular, since pipe is so UI focused in Angular. So looking forward to see how this works.
And it's kind of the way that we're using it, it's kind of the same deal. It's used for, manipulating an object, right? And so we got this transform method, and this transform method takes in the value. And that's going to be the value that's coming in. And then we also have this metadata property. And so what we can do is we can pull off, or we'll return, and we'll use that class to, now this time we're going to use a plain to class method. So we got a plain JavaScript object coming in. We're going to convert it into a particular type. And so the first option to this is that type. And so we can say metadata dot meta type, and then pass it in the value. Now I'll go ahead, I'll set a breakpoint here, and we need to tell our app that we want to use this. And so setting it up is identical to setting up an interceptor. You can put it at the method level, the class level. We're going to put it at the app level here, using the tokens. And so we'll say again, provide an app pipe. And so whenever it asks for a pipe, we're going to tell it to use the data pipe. And I'll go ahead and attach my debugger so we can look to see what it looks like on the way through.
Hey, Eli, I have a quick question there. If you had let's say you had 3 pipes you wanted to be app level, could you put them all there and then just go from top to bottom?
Exactly. Yeah. So the order that they're registered is the order that they get ran.
Okay.
And so we'll go through here. And so we can see we have our value of 1 coming through. And if we take a look at this data type, we can see, thanks to TypeScript, we can tell that it was a number that came in. And so we won't see it here, but if I go back into the controller, okay, I already got my breakpoint set there. Now we can see that our actual ID is a number and not a string coming in. And boom, there we go. Looks like I'm gonna have to find a better way to demo pipe transformations than this particular demo in the future, but that's all good.
You're doing a great job, Eli.
Thank you. All right, now, okay, so we're getting data. Let's see what it's like to create data real quick. And so, going back, since we're using HTTP and we got all of our HTTP methods, we generally use the post method for data creation. And so we have a post decorator that we can use. And so we'll call this method create. And then we'll pass in a speaker object. And we'll pass this along to our speaker service, and we'll just call it create there too. And to import that guy, generate that method. And to create data using TypeORM is very easy. We'll just call the speaker repository save method and then pass in the speaker to it. Now, one thing that we want to do is when a speaker object comes in, we want to set its ID to undefined, because what the save method does is if the object or the row already exists, it's going to update it. If it doesn't, it's going to create it. And so if we automatically set that ID, we're going to make sure that our create method is always going to create data. That way, if a user accidentally passes in an ID in their post request, it doesn't accidentally overwrite an existing record. And I want to return this method. All right, so I will just take this object here and I'll fire up a new tab. localhost. We're going to speakers. And we'll set the request to a post. And over here in the body, we'll set it to raw. So we're just passing in raw data and then set the type to JSON. And then let's add so we'll make sure we take the ID out of here. And then let's add a new speaker. So we'll have Jesse Sanders. And he's going to be the boss.
Yeah, you got to get that rockstar rating up there on that one.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. All right. So if this is all good, we'll go ahead and create. And, ooh, we got something. Something died. Cannot set property ID of I forgot to tell, just like we had to tell this GET request that the ID was coming from the parameter, we have to tell Nest where the speaker data is coming from. And that we're going to say it's coming in from the body of the request. Duplicate key constraint. Why? Let's see what it's doing real quick. All right, so we got our speaker. So it has a name and nickname. Doesn't have an ID. Primary generate column. Okay, well, something is going weird there. I won't dwell on it. We'll just pretend that it worked.
Maybe it's line 22. Maybe because it says it's a primary generated. So if you're actually putting that on, I mean, I don't know. I'm just guessing because I'm not the expert here.
Yeah, I can try it. Unless I somehow got a key that was already undefined in the database. That'd be weird. No?
Duplicate key violates unique constraint.
I think. But let me change.
This is why we needed Camille on the show.
Yeah, let me change all these values here real quick just to make sure it's not. Sorry, Jesse. Oh, that worked. Somehow, some way, I must have got another unique constraint on one of the other fields.
Maybe there can only be one number 10. Maybe there can only be one top rock star.
there can only be one.
Yeah, but I would have to yield to Jesse on that because he's definitely the top rock star.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Something weird happened there. We'll roll with it though. I think it probably is the rock star rating. Like I bet if I tried to add this. Yeah.
So maybe it thinks that the rock star rating it needs to be the unique.
Yeah, I've added 3 or 4 more now though, and it's working.
Poor Jesse. What happened to that rock star rating?
All right. Well, we'll roll with it. Let's take a look though and see what
We
happens.
can't leave it like that. You got to give him an 11, Eli.
All right, there we go.
Okay, there you go. There you go. All right, this is fine.
There we go. Okay. Let's see what happens when, so our database has like some constraints on it, right? That we've already kind of broke. Let's see what happens like when we try to pass in an item that's required by the database, but isn't passed in by the API. So you can see that we got another 500 error. And if we go look, we're going to see like the null value and column name violates a non-null constraint, right? And so this is not usually what you want to do when you are, doing validation. You don't want to like leave it up to your database and return back 500 errors. So fortunately, Nest provides another good way to do that, and that's also using pipes. And so I mentioned earlier that pipes are a good way to do validation. And we can use the other friend of Nest, the class validator object. And so what I'll do here is before we'll say const data equals, and we'll turn it into the class. And then I can run this data object through this validate method. And this is from import validate from class validator. And then we'll say if, so this is going to return back a promise. So let's wait on it and turn it to async. So this returns back an array of validation errors. And so if there's any errors in here, we'll throw a new bad request exception. And then we'll just give them an error. And we'll say bad data, yo.
You crack me up, Eli.
And in here, so now class validator is very similar to all these other ones. It uses decorators, and so we can provide validation based on decorators. So up here on name, what we'll do is we'll use a decorator called isDefined, and so this will make sure that it is in the body of the request, and then we also want to make sure that it is not empty, and so they're just not passing in an empty string. We'll do the same for nickname. And down here on Rockstar rating, we want to make sure that it is defined, but then we're going to also make sure that it is a number. And we never pass in created date, so we don't need to worry about that. Let's give this a try. Okay, so if I hit send here, you can see, okay, now we get back at 400, which is the appropriate error code when you're sending in a bad request to the server with the message bad data yo. And if we go take a look at the request here, there we go. So we got errors. Now we can take a look, and instead of just like, returning back this message like this, we could iterate over this errors object. This gives us back all the data that we would ever want about like what caused the error, what field was the error, the object, and all that kind of stuff. But fortunately, we don't have to because this is such a common use case inside of a server-side app. Nest actually provides its own validation pipe for us to use. And it pretty much does what we did here, except it parses that object for us and returns us back a much better error message. And so we'll go ahead and set that up to use. And so here is that instance where we're going to add another pipe to the pipeline, and we'll import this validation pipe. Which, if we come up here, we can see that it's coming from Nest.js common. So one of the building blocks that it provides for us. And we successfully built. Go back to Postman. And now when we do this, we can see we are getting a much more verbose error message that, we can take a look. So we can see that what it was that caused the error to happen. So it wasn't defined and it wasn't empty. Shows us the object, tells us the name of the property that it failed on. So we can use all this information inside of our Angular apps to, throw up nice error messages to show like what particular input field caused the validation error and whatnot, if you weren't doing validation for some reason in your Angular app. All right, so Bonnie, I know we are kind of running low on time.
You're getting away with this. I was just saying you should keep an eye on it, but I don't want you to stop because I want you to get through the end of it.
Okay, I think I was going to show like updating and deleting. That's kind of just like more of the same. Like, so we have a delete decorator that we use for delete requests, a put decorator that we use for put requests. So it's kind of showing more of the same. So I'll just kind of, leave it at that. What I do want to show though is guards inside a nest. And so we'll show that here real quick. And so guards inside a nest are very similar to guards inside of Angular. Their primary purpose is for authentication purposes. And what we want to do here is we're going to set up a really quick and simple validation system for our controller. And I'll show you the way that I want it to work. And so we'll say we're going to specify what roles that we want a user to belong to in order to call these particular methods. And so I can say I'll create a roles decorator. Now I want to say only users can call the get method. And maybe only admins can do manipulation of data. So creating data, updating data, deleting data, that kind of stuff. So we'll say users and admins. So I'm going to create this roles decorator real quick. And so we'll say nest g decorator util roles. And if we take a look at that real quick, fortunately, out of the box, it comes ready to use because this is the exact use case that it's meant for. So we'll have roles, and it takes in an array of strings that we can access later on. I'll import that. And so now that we have these roles defined here, we'll actually create the guard now. So we'll say nest g guard util auth. And I have this method. It's a little complex. I'm not going to have you all watch me type it out. Okay, so this role, it has a can activate method, fairly similar to Angular. And then basically we return back a Boolean. If we're going to allow this request to go through, we return true. If not, we're going to return false. And so in here, we're looking at the headers. We're going to pass in a authorization header that's going to contain a bearer token. Our bearer token is going to be really simple. It's either going to be a user token or it's going to be an admin token. Notice that these roles are supposed to be singular. Here real quick, let me update that. Okay, and so if they pass in a user token, we're going to add the user role to this array here that they're going to have. If they pass in an admin token, they're going to have users and admins. So they'll be able to do everything. And then to inject the reflector real quick. And so the reflector is what is used to take a look at the controller and pull the roles metadata that we put on using the decorator. Okay, and that should do it. We'll go to the app module. And the same thing, except this time we're adding a guard, and we called it auth guard. So we'll let that compile. Success. Now if we come over here to the get method, if I try to run this request, it's going to return back with a 403 forbidden error now because I'm not passing in any authorization token. And so if I come over here to authorization and tell it I want to use a bearer token and then set the value to user token, it will now let me through. And if I set an invalid user token, it should kick me out again as well. And over here on the speaker side, same deal. We'll come to authorization, bearer token. So if we try it using a valid user token, you can see that it will kick us out. But if we replace this with an admin token, oh, it's still, it let us through, but now it's erroring because of the validation errors. So it would have worked. So, I mean, inside of this auth guard, like you really don't want to be passing around plain strings as your bearer tokens and whatnot. You probably want to be using something like a JOT or a JWT. So inside of this auth guard, you could validate the JOT. You can call into any backend services that you need to do to like look up users, to check their permissions and roles and stuff like that. But this gives you the nice handy place to go ahead and do that. Awesome. So any questions before I wrap up?
I think we're out of time, but I think this is really cool.
Awesome. Okay.
I mean, I think really what jumps out at me about this, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of GraphQL. It's simple, and what I really think is I love more than anything is what I've been seeing in a couple different places lately is auto-generating services. Like we're writing all this code and we don't need to live like that. And that really brings me so much joy.
Right. Okay, so on just to throw out some resources, of course, the Nest.js website. If you're interested in learning more, I did a talk or a workshop at ngConf on Nest, and that is up on YouTube. And so you can go and watch that as well as the repo to the actual workshop app. And so if you kind of want to like go through everything that we did here today, plus then some, that's all there. And then I got a blog series that I'm doing on the Ionic blog about using Ionic apps with Nest.js as your backend. So check that out. And any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at Ely Lucas.
This is very cool, Eli. Thank you again for coming on and teaching us about Nest, because everybody's been talking about this. This was such a simple demo, and it was really great. And I appreciate you taking the time to put this together for us. Yes,
thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
Okay. Anything else from anybody else? I see you, Yavi, but you're muted.
I just think Nest is really cool because you can easily add high standards to your API without too much effort. So really excited.
It is beautiful. Okay, I think we're a little bit over the hour, so I'm gonna just make the goodbyes really quick and say thank you again, Eli, for coming on. Thank you, panelists. I know we didn't have time for a lot of questions today, but we covered a lot of ground. I hope everyone will come back and join us again. Let me see what we have. I think we don't have anything next week. The week after, we're supposed to have Myra Rodriguez. And so we'll see you all again soon. Thanks for joining us. Have a good one.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
See you in Denver.
See you later.